Today we are going to talk about settling IEP disputes, that's Individualized Education Program disputes, through mediation, and it is my great pleasure to be here with Carol Himes from the New York Peace Institute. Welcome, Carol. Thanks for coming to us. This is one of a series of live stream presentations that we do every month on the third Thursday of each month at noon. We are going to spend about an hour, we'll keep it under an hour, talking about mediation. And we have a chat box. If you have questions, feel free to chat those questions, and we will do our best to answer them. So welcome, Carol. Thank you for coming. So nice to have you here. Can you start by telling us a bit about the New York Peace Institute and the Special Mediation Program there?
Sure. So thanks for having me, first of all. I appreciate that. The New York Peace Institute generally is a mediation center that provides free mediation services for a wide variety of kinds of concerns, anything from parenting concerns to neighbor disputes to noise disputes and other kinds of disputes. We can mediate that all free of charge. We also provide credentialing and some training services. I am very fortunate I get to run the Special Education Mediation Program, and that's what we're here to discuss today. And I just wanted to add, while I run the program in Brooklyn and Manhattan, there are other mediation centers all across the city and across the state that provide similar services.
So, burning question, why we're here, that we hear from parents is, why special ed mediation? What will that do for my child? So let's explore that. So, with that, what do you see as a benefit to a parent going to mediation rather than something else like an impartial?
Okay, so let's talk first about the difference between an impartial and a mediation. An impartial is basically where schools and parents come together before a person who's like a judge. And that person gathers information and then renders a decision. The parent and the school don't have a say in that decision. It's just they're told what happens. Mediation is different. Mediation is a process basically where the parents of a child with a disability or a child that's suspected of having a disability and a school come together with a neutral person, a mediator, who tries to help them sort through their differences. So the benefits are multifold. First of all, here's a collaborative discussion. The parents and schools talk about what options they have, what makes sense for the child, they can be creative, and the decisions are not imposed on the family or on the school. It's really a collaboration. It's really what works. Nobody has to do anything. So number one, there's a collaboration, can be creative. Number two, because of our process, we can mediate the case much more rapidly than an impartial hearing. So what happens is the discussion is had and solutions are reached much more rapidly, and the changes then can happen much more rapidly. And the final option that I think is really cool is this. Mediation is a collaboration. It builds on the relationships between parents and schools. Parents and schools have ongoing relationships. A child walks through the door of school, and they're going to be going to that school for a very long time. Maybe there are siblings before, maybe there are siblings after, but that's an ongoing relationship. There is real reason to support that relationship and to help it be strong, not to fracture it. And so mediation helps support that. So those are basically the strengths as I see it.
So parents often ask us, well, what does mediation look like? Logistically, what is it? So tell us, who would be present? How long does it last? Give us some logistics so parents will know what they're getting into.
Okay, so basically parents should expect a supported conversation around their child. We like to say that this is a child-centered conversation. So that's the first thing. That's what they should expect. Who would be there? Great question. Parent or other educational decision maker. Usually it's the parent, but sometimes it's someone else. Sometimes the student's there. Why would the student be there? If the child's 5 years old, maybe not a great idea. But as a child gets older, we like to hear their voice. They can speak much more strongly about what's happening and why and how they feel, number one. And number two, the solutions will include their voice. They're not determinative, but their voice about really is it going to work for them. So if you have a 16-year-old and you reach a solution, but the solution really isn't going to work for them, that's not a solution. So it's a great way to include their voice. I also like to say as a side note, it's a great way for a a child to learn how to self-advocate in a setting that's supportive. Now, if the parent says, I don't want that child, my child there, I don't think it's good for them, the parent has a right to say that. But I do like to have the student there as they get older if the parent agrees. Who else? Sometimes there's a parent advocate or a lawyer. And always, always, there's someone from the administrative level of the Department of Education. Why? Because that person has the ability to make a decision for the Department of Education. Legally, a school can't make a decision for the Department of Education. So that person can make a decision, and you know that it can be actualized as opposed to just making a decision and it goes nowhere. Really can go someplace. They also have a broader view of what schools can and can't do. And then there's school folks there, depending on what the issue is. Maybe it's the classroom teacher. If there's a speech concern, maybe it's the speech provider. But then there are school folks there to support the conversation. So it's a broad range of people at the table.
That's great. And how long do these last?
They're variable. They're variable. Usually we do it in one session. Usually it's 2 to 3 hours. Occasionally there's a matter that requires us to come back to the table. So there's a lot of discussion, and then maybe there's some information that has to be gathered, and then parties agree to come back to the table in a day or a week or a month. So it depends, but almost always it's about 2 to 3 hours.
And where does it take place?
Oftentimes at the school, because we can access the people that can have this discussion, and also that's a good place for a parent usually. They know where the child goes to school, and we can get the school folks there in a way that's really productive. Sometimes, though, people feel that they want a more neutral, they feel that a more neutral location would be helpful, so we'll offer up the Mediation Center. And we have offices in Brooklyn and in Manhattan, and the other boroughs do as well. And sometimes it's at a Department of Education office. So oftentimes school, but sometimes other places. We try to make it accommodating for people.
And tell us about the mediators.
So
Who are they? What do they bring?
So we have a roster of mediators. These are people that are trained, first of all, in basic mediation skills. And then they have another layer of training in special education laws and regulations and how they interplay with mediation skills. So they have that training, quite rigorous. They are neutral. They are not paid by either the Department of Education or the parent. That's really important in mediation. If you are paid, for example, by the parent or by the school, it's kind of hard to trust that person is not siding with one or the other. So by law, we're neutral. They're monitored by the Community Dispute Resolution Center, the Mediation Center, in the borough in which they are working. And so we monitor our mediators in Brooklyn and Manhattan. And they are very committed, intelligent people that really do this because of a passion.
Thank you. Now that we've, I think, gotten a mental picture of what a mediation would look like, I think sometimes parents wonder, well, what kind of cases would be appropriate for mediation? So I thought it might be helpful to talk about a couple of case studies.
So why don't we first talk about a little boy that we mediated for. He was in 2nd grade and he had autism. He was attending a community school and he was struggling both academically and socially and behaviorally. He was just having a rough time in his community school. So at his annual meeting, the IEP team said, basically, this child's now finishing up 2nd grade. He's been here kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade. We've tried lots of things. This isn't working. We really think that he belongs in a citywide setting, in a District 75 setting, to get more supports. Well, the parents heard this and they were very upset by that. They felt basically the school wasn't supporting their child, that they were pushing him out because of, instead of supporting his disability, that he was being pushed out because of that. And they also could say, he's really smart, which he was. Right. Why isn't this working? I want him in a community school. But they decided, well, I'm going to go take a look at one of these District 75 schools. And then they looked, and they didn't see kids that looked like their child. And then they really decided, no. So they asked for mediation around 2 points, basically, around the placement and also around communication with the school, which they felt had been really fractured by this recommendation. The school agreed to mediate because they really wanted to have this discussion as well, and they felt that they needed the support of a mediator. They had the discussion, but they felt it hadn't been productive, and so they thought that with the help of a neutral person, perhaps they could have it in a more productive way. And so they came to the table, they discussed their concerns, and the administrator, the person, remember I said to you earlier that we have to have someone from the administrative level of the Department of Education, she came with a list of schools that might be options for this child. And she said, you don't have to say, yes, I'm going to send your child to school, but will you go see them? And I'll go with you. I'll arrange for them, these visits, and I'll go with you. And the parents said, well, we'll take another look, because clearly we know our boy is in second grade and he is struggling. We'll take a look, but we're not agreeing. And they did look, and I will tell you that they found a school that they absolutely loved and agreed to go to that child at school.
It's great. It's like a happy ending.
Well, it was through a very tough. That was a long mediation, but it was tough and lots of tears and shit. Right. But it was really a very productive conversation.
So I think you touched on some of this, but so why was this useful versus an impartial? That is the other option.
The parent really could talk about their loss of trust in the school, that they felt they were not supported. They were given the option. They weren't ordered to do anything. They were given the option to go look at the school. They were given the option to come take a look. And they were also got to hear from the school. This was good for the school, too. We haven't given up on your child. Right? What they were saying very clearly was, we feel that your child deserves more. We've tried our options. We think he deserves more. We think he would be very successful, but we don't have the skills to do what he needs. And so we really care about your son, but really feel that he would benefit from teachers with this specialized training in this specialized school. And I think they felt different about the reasons and then the results.
So it sounds like they had been feeling kind of rejected by the school, but after this mediation, maybe they felt that after the school really cared about the school.
Came to understand it in a different way, and for them that was important because they loved their son, and came to understand that the option was really designed to support their child, and that there were schools, not like the first one that they saw, which all agreed was not appropriate, and I'm not sure what had happened with that, but there really were schools that could support a very smart little boy who has a disability, it's autism, and so there were people that could support all of who he is. So they left feeling encouraged.
So I now understand what the parent got out of it, and why was this useful for the school?
But the school had the opportunity to really express their deep caring for this child, and to really affirm their commitment to him, and to let the parents know all of the various things they tried along the way, and to let them also know that there were teachers with different training that really could help them. So it provided them a forum to say, I really care about you. Assistant principal in particular was speaking very warmly and very affirmatively about the ultimate faith he had in this little boy, but he felt he needed supports that his teachers didn't have the training for. So it gave them the opportunity to say, we're professionals, we really care. This is not a cold-hearted decision, and we didn't reach it easily. We reached it because we felt that this is the right thing. It's important to them.
Right, they're educators. They spent their lives educating children. They wanted
yes.
to be individualized. They were acting in the best interest of the child.
Exactly right.
And so you mentioned that I think that these mediations can result in an agreement, right? So can you talk to us a bit about the agreement?
Sure. So the law says, and I think it's a good idea, that if any portion or all of the disagreement is resolved, the mediator has to write an agreement. All agreements have to be in writing. I think that's a really good thing. because everybody then knows what's expected and what isn't. So if part of the concerns are resolved, then the mediator writes the agreement as to those. And if all of them, the mediator also writes. They write the agreement then and there. And that mediation agreement, by the way, is legally binding. It's the same impact as if an impartial hearing officer renders a decision. If there are IEP changes that are agreed to in the session, then the IEP team has to meet, and the law says immediately, have to meet immediately to update the IEP to make it consistent with that agreement. So, it is legally binding and has impact, force and effect.
That's actually pretty amazing to me, knowing what I know about the big process we have in the city, that something can be written right at that mediation.
Yeah.
And that is.
It is absolutely immediate, and it's a skill that our mediators work long and hard to attain because they have to write then and there. But what it does is essentially gives you an action plan then.
Right.
You know what's agreed to, you know the timelines for the agreement, you know who's responsible for it. So it basically then gives you an action plan. Everybody can look back and say who's responsible for what by when. It's very helpful,
Right.
and it anticipates that there could be future disagreement around things, but you can look at it and say that consult the paper, right? So you know who's responsible for what by when.
Right. So I think we're going to talk about another case study, but in between, I just wanted to talk about Include a little bit. We have a resource line here, and if you have any questions about your child, either about mediation or really any other questions about navigating the special ed process, but in particular here about whether you think your child's case is a good one for mediation, please give us a call. The number is 212-677-4660. And it is open Monday through Thursday, 9 to 3, and you can leave a message and you call the time. The line is not open, and someone will call you back pretty immediately. So, and you will then get an appointment with a family educator who can really advise you on your specific situation. So, that being said, let's talk about another case study. Do you have a second case study?
Sure.
I'd like to discuss?
Sure. So I was also thinking about a 5th grade child. He was in a 12-to-1 plus 1 class. That's basically a maximum of 12 students with 1 teacher and a paraprofessional in the room. He had a classification of emotionally disturbed, and he was having some real challenges in school. He was having behavioral challenges. This child IEP provided for counseling once a week for 30 minutes, and we learned at intake that he was also receiving outside counseling services. But he was having very, very significant behavioral challenges at school. He was basically injuring other children regularly, himself regularly, and adults. And so it was virtually impossible for him to access his education because his behaviors were impeding his ability to get to that education. So, what to do? He really needed some support. He did not have a whole behavior intervention plan. And his parent came and said, I keep getting calls from the school. They don't know what to do. His behavior is basically part of his disability, but I'm worried. He needs more supports because this is not working out well. And so she requested mediation around supporting the child who is classified emotionally disturbed, exhibiting behaviors, and having challenges in school and not able to go, not able to access education. School agreed that they were happy to have that conversation because they wanted to have that conversation. It was challenging for them as well.
So, same question as before. What happened and why was it helpful to first?
So most importantly, we've always put the child at the center.
Right.
So what happened with this child? What was agreed to in this session? What was agreed to in this session was, first of all, there would be a functional behavior assessment. What's that? That's basically when appropriate people from the school, over a period of time, gather data to assess the students' behaviors and what's triggering those behaviors. And it takes a period of time because you want to look at a child in various settings over various periods of time before you then end the collection process, and then do something with it.
Right.
What do you do with it? You then create a behavior intervention plan. What's that? Behavior intervention plan is just what it sounds like. It's how do you intervene to approach a limited number of the behaviors based on the data that was collected earlier. So there was an agreement to do that functional behavior assessment and to do a behavior intervention plan. But then they said, we know it's going to take a while to do this properly. What do we do now? Because this is a child basically in crisis. The school said this and the parents said this. What do we do today? So they agreed to meet right after the fact and set up sort of a short-term interim plan based on their best estimates of what to do. Okay, so they said, let's at least do the best we can. We know it's not going to be perfect, but let's figure out another plan. What else did they do? In the discussion, the school said, I know you said, parent, that your child, for us to learn what the outside counselor said. Now, the parent was a little concerned about that, but what they agreed to was the school and the parent could have a conversation around, the school and the outside therapist could have a conversation around issues that impact school, not around home, because they decided to keep it private, but around school. So they opened up that line of communication so the school had more information. The parent also revealed that she was in the process of obtaining an outside evaluation. And so they agreed that the parent would provide that evaluation to the school, and then the IEP team would meet and figure out more fully how to update the IEP with that additional information. And the last thing that, as I recall, they did is I think that they gave that child a one-to-one paraprofessional because he needed that help in the interim as crisis until they could figure out more fully what to do. So a lot happened in that session that hadn't been reached before.
To me, when you're describing this, I was thinking of whether that could have happened in the partial hearing, and this seems like a very subtly and specifically tailored situation to this child and this, this particular situation. I'm not sure that could happen in the partial.
Well, you're raising a very important point. When there's a conversation,
right,
when there's a flow of ideas, when there's a collaboration, we reach much more nuanced approaches
right,
to supporting children. When people are gathering evidence, and that sometimes is needed. I'm not saying we shouldn't
right,
be doing sometimes it's needed, but when you're gathering evidence, you don't reach these nuanced approaches to collaborating and working together for students. So I agree with you, Zai.
So you mentioned a few cases, these case studies, and you talked a lot about the benefits of mediation, and I'm so old. Are there cases that cannot be mediated?
Well, there are a few. First of all, if a child is classified with special ed or for an IEP, and the parent says, nope, I don't want that anymore, we can't mediate that. The school can't ask for that. Number two, if a parent does not want an initial evaluation, then the school can't request mediation. The parent has a right to say, no, thank you to that. Initial placement also, the parent can request a mediation around an initial placement, school can't. And the last is, we can't mediate attorney's fees. Oh, just can't, you have to go to an impartial on that. So those are the 4 areas.
Okay, so this is areas that can't be that.
It's very discreet. Largely, we can. Right. Much more often we can. Okay. Mediation. And they're free, so it's a nice service.
So I'm seeing a question here in the chat box. Question says, my child has, I think, severe OCD and has been home for 14 months. Do you have, I guess, would this be an appropriate case for mediation?
Absolutely would. It sounds to me like this child receiving services, you're looking to see what could happen in the future. We can absolutely talk about that in mediation, figure out what to do. Or perhaps figure out what to do assuming the schools would be amenable. So I would say, if for a parent like that, you might want to check in with someone like Zai to talk it through. Or you could reach out to the Mediation Center. Mediation Center would be the center where in this case, the CSE is CSE that is responsible for your child. So if it's in Manhattan, you would request it for me. If you're in Brooklyn, you request it for me. And if you're one of the other 5 boroughs, I think you're going to hand out materials that tell people where to direct their requests, right?
Yes, and I'll talk about this at the end, but you should get some information emailed to you. Everyone who's registered for this webinar. I see one more question that says, how can a parent find out if mediation is the right next step? And I think this goes to really what you were just saying. You can certainly call, include, and talk to someone like me and talk your case through, and we can advise you on whether mediation is a good next step. Or you can certainly call the New York Police Institute and talk to you, Carol.
Absolutely. So we're happy to get your calls. But if you want advice,
Right.
I would say go to someone like Zai first, because mediators have to be neutral.
Right.
So we can't give you advice legally. I think advice comes from someone like you. But if you want to know about the mediation process and can we mediate, then you come to me. But if you want to say, what's the best thing for me? Go to someone like Zai. She can really give you some advice.
That's actually an excellent point. We here at Include don't need to be neutral. We're really here to advise. But a hugely important part of mediation is neutrality, so that all sides, and even the parents, of the process.
Exactly right.
So that's a good point.
I see a question about non-compliance on an IEP.
Oh, yes.
And that's also something that we could talk about in mediation. Just the short of it is yes. Yes, that's absolutely an appropriate conversation.
And again, maybe call someone like Include to talk it through first. Because there may be times where there might be a process where you talk to the school, you talk to your, and mediation is part of that process, but we can advise you on where, what steps to take before getting mediation.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
I think earlier we were talking about the differences between impartial hearing and mediation. So and I understand that even if a parent files for an impartial hearing, they can still pursue mediation. Can you talk a bit about how that works?
Yeah, that's sometimes confusing to people, so I'm glad you asked that question. There are 2 ways that can happen. First is if a parent asks for an impartial hearing, but we mediate first and we resolve the issues, then the parent can withdraw their impartial hearing request. So if the impartial hearing has not occurred and the parent wants to first try mediation, knowing that they aren't going to be compelled to do anything, they can try that, assuming that the school agrees. If the impartial hearing has already occurred, then that hearing officer renders a binding decision. We can't mediate after that, but before we can. Now, also this hybrid process. When a parent requests an impartial hearing, there's something that's called a resolution session. The resolution session is basically a time when the school representative and the parent has a chat about trying to resolve the matter. A mediator can come in and mediate that resolution session if both parties agree to that, and it would be the same process as a special ed mediation. No one would be required to do anything except listen to one another, and if the matter is resolved, the mediator writes an agreement. It's legally binding. Part of that agreement in that case would be withdrawing the request for an impartial hearing. If issues are resolved and some are not, then the mediator would write as to 1, 2, and 3, this is resolved and how it's resolved, and then as to 4, 5, and 6, for example, the impartial hearing officer would then proceed on those limited of issues. So that's also an option.
Before we go on, I'm seeing some comments in the chat box, and it seems to me that there's some specific issues there, and I would really urge a call into resource line and someone like me or another talk about specific situations. I think that might be the best way to get the right information out.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Zai, also because one of the tenets of mediation is confidentiality. And we really have to respect the confidentiality of the student and the parent and the school. And so I think what you're saying is you have to respect that confidentiality as well.
Exactly. Do you have Oh, actually, I'm thinking another question. So the question is, which success rates are higher, mediated resolution sessions or mediation alone?
It's an interesting question. I actually don't, I'm sorry, I don't have the data. It tells me they're about the same. So I'm guessing it's roughly the same. But I haven't collected the data around that, so I don't want to tell you for sure. But I do think it's roughly the same because it's the same process, right?
So if a parent wants to consider mediation, do you have any advice for the parent on how they should prepare?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, I think they should really sit down in their own quiet time and think through what's really important to them. Really think it through, because sometimes there are children and it's very emotional. Make a note and make a list so that when you go to the session, you really use your time well. You know that number one, number two, and number three are really important to you, and you don't forget because of the conversation. You bring the documentation that you would like to. You bring a support person if that would be helpful to you, whether it's an advocate or a sister or a friend, or you can bring some support because you know that that's important to you. But bring the documentation.
And so this sounds like a powerful process, everything you said. So
Well, parents absolutely do not need lawyers, but sometimes they benefit from a lawyer or an advocate, not an advocate. And the reason is these very smart people can have challenges accessing the special laws and regulations. They're complicated, they're not intuitive, and also parents are talking about their children. Children become, it's hard to sometimes emotionally separate from that. So sometimes it's absolutely not required, but sometimes people benefit from that.
So we've heard that sometimes a parent will schedule a mediation, and then before the mediation actually takes place, someone from the district, from the DOE, will call and offer them a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
So what should parents consider of that?
So that does happen sometimes, and to me, that's a benefit of requesting mediation in a way, because what it's done is it's taken this challenge and sort of brought it to the light and gotten, if the school district calls and offers a resolution, the parent should think about it. Is this really resolving my concerns? Then they should go with it. Maybe they want to check appropriate. But at the end of the day, they're not required to mediate. If it matches up with what they think they need and it resolves the matter, then they don't have to mediate. They can withdraw their request. And that makes me happy. Right. It resolved because this is some light on this concern. That's great.
I just want to echo something you said, which is option, but sometimes the parent might get this offer and might need to talk it through with someone, whether this is actually what they want or not. And so I urge you to call someone like Include. We'd be happy to talk it through with you, right, to see, is this really the right thing? And I think, as we were talking about before, they could maybe call you as a process. We can maybe bounce it around a bit with them.
Yes, and I think that's a really, really important point. We can't give you advice because then we wouldn't be neutral. Right. You are absolutely the right ones, and someone like you, Include, or someone else, but you call Zai because she can really give you advice.
So a little bit back to logistics. How would a parent go about requesting mediation?
Well, I would say call the Mediation Center of the borough in which your child is attending, or the CSC that's responsible for your child's IEP. And the distinction is just that sometimes kids that are in charter schools, those children are being helped by CSCs, but it's the borough in which your child is attending, or the CSC that's responsible. Okay.
Any last thoughts? You give us a lot of great thoughts, so you don't have to have any.
No, this is a process that's speedy and it is collaborative. And so I think for many challenges, it's an option. I want to encourage people. The other thing I'll tell you is, folks like you are happy to talk to people. This can become overwhelming. Reach out to the resources that you can. Talk to someone like Zai. Call the mediation centers. We're happy to talk to you about process and let you know what can be done, what can't be done. Calling us doesn't obligate you to do anything except to have a conversation. We're very happy to do that, and see if it's the right thing for you. These are opportunities. You're free. Our service. I just want to let people know that there are, in the face of challenges, places to go.
So a few last thoughts. Anyone registered for this webinar will receive by email some resources, including New York Peace Institute Special Education Mediation Brochure, which has a lot of the information, especially on process, that we've talked about. Also an INCLUDEnyc tip sheet on the differences between mediation and impartial hearing, because I know parents a lot of the time are trying to decide what is the right thing to do if something is going on at school. And there's two options that parents weigh. And then also on the INCLUDEnyc resource line, which is the resource line I mentioned before. Before I completely end, I see one more question. The question is, why can agreements be reached at mediation that were not reached at the IEP meeting? So yeah, I mean, good question. You've described the mediation, and there is the mediator and the district person, but everyone else has been at the IEP meeting. Why does it work at a mediation when it doesn't work?
I think there are a couple of reasons. First of all, the mediator is trained in conflict resolution. So what happens is the mediator helps support the conversation, helps bring out conversation. We try to slow things down. Sometimes IEP meetings can be rushed. We really keep the conversations so that they're accessible and slow, but also there's this neutral person here that helps the conversation. Also touched upon is there's another person there. That's the person from the administrative level of the Department of Education. And he or she has different information. They have a broader view of what schools can and can't do. They can bring more resources to the table. They can help support schools in doing and taking other steps or considering other options. And so with the combination of different people at the table, going it down, the support of the mediator, and the other person there, we do help people reach different decisions.
If any other last questions, type quickly. But I also want to talk about our next live stream, because we do these monthly. It will be in November, the third Thursday of November, and it will be on supporting students and staff in the student-led IEP process. And so to show that when students actively participate in their own process, they are then better equipped to articulate their needs and can advocate for themselves really in the future. So that next webinar will talk about how that process works.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And also, just general reminders: check out our website. INCLUDEnyc.org has a lot of information about upcoming events, trainings, tip sheets. New York is nypeace.org, right? It has an equal number of great suggestions and resources. So check those out, and we look forward to seeing you at next month's live stream. Thank you, everyone, for listening and spending a bunch of hour with us.
Thank you.